Hello and welcome to the Thriving Workplace series. I'm Sean Glavin, founder of the Boston HR Council and partner at Lockton Companies, and I'm excited to moderate this two-part event. As a leader of a few executive communities and a partner at a global consulting firm, I've had a front row seat to the wild ride the last 2+ years, especially the ride that all of us have been on both through businesses and as business leaders. However, by far, leading the way is the rising importance of what I've heard and we're calling the talent economy, or the race for attracting and keeping the best folks by creating thriving workplaces. So we're really excited that today we're going to talk about really the four pillars or four areas that have emerged as we've engaged with business leaders in our networks. And that we've all agreed on are just the most important pieces of building that type of workplace culture. And those four pillars are flexibility relative to hiring and retaining our top talent, dynamic compensation, the importance and business case of well-being, and in optimizing hybrid workplaces. Now, we've been fortunate to gather world-class subject matter experts in each one of these four areas. In today's session, we'll focus on flexibility and compensation, and then our next section will be focused on hybrid workplaces and well-being. Now, I'm extremely excited to introduce our two subject matter experts for today. We have Leanne Rodd, who's the Director of Talent at Flex Professionals, who will dive deep into her expertise on flexibility. And we have Beata Dragovic, who's the founder and CEO of Freedom Trail Financial, and Beata will jump on after Leanne to talk about compensation. Now, before I turn it over, I just want to give folks just the idea that we'll have two different conversations. If you have any questions that you'd like to have answered by our subject matter expert panelists today, please use the question and answer box that's in the Zoom webinar, and we will get to them immediately after each one of those conversations. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Leanne Rodd.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for that great introduction. This has been a very interesting few years in hiring and retaining employees for sure. I'm Leanne Rodd. I'm the Director of Talent at Flex Professionals, and could advance one slide. I'll get started. Just to dive in and give you some context of how we are in this flexibility space, Flex Professionals is a niche staffing firm focused on connecting experienced professionals who are seeking part-time or flexible roles with businesses who are in need of talent, and specifically top talent. We were founded more than a decade ago on that mission of flexibility and have been helping small and mid-sized businesses grow and scale affordably ever since. We do this through connecting hiring teams to a talent pool who is also seeking flexibility and who most typically are returning to work after caregiving, scaling back from full-time to accommodate other demands, or wanting to work full-time in a significantly flexible way. We recruit mainly through referrals, which means we're often finding candidates who aren't looking through traditional channels. And lastly, we're committed to sharing information that we've gathered over this decade of working with more than 800 businesses and over 20,000 job seekers across both audiences, sharing this information with hiring teams and job seekers to help establish best practices and successful connections. Next slide. So the flexibility, as Sean mentioned, of 2022 is not the same as it was in 2019. For the past year and a half, as I'm sure you've noticed, the scales have been tipped toward job seekers. Inflation and a dynamic hiring landscape have brought along with them the higher pay rates that we're seeing, not only for new hires, but also for existing roles. This power shift applies more acutely to specific roles for sure. We're continuing to see a high demand for technical and finance positions, and across the board, more demands related to work location. Some companies are trying to figure out how to put that toothpaste back into the tube, requiring workers to be on site all the time with really with varying success. And since we're not all the heads of large, gigantic financial firms or electric car companies, we're likely aiming for somewhere in the middle. Survey after survey during the pandemic has shown us that most workers in professional roles are seeking a hybrid location. There was a Gallup Future of Work poll released in March of this year that shows that 59% of workers say that hybrid is ideal, while 32% are looking to be fully remote and just 9% prefer to be on site all the time, with the top reasons for these choices being commute, personal well-being, balance, social connection, and productivity. So how do we operationalize flexibility in a way that meets both needs, the needs of the business and the current or future employees? So before we dive into the how, we're going to look at the talent pool just for a minute, because it's important to understand where people are coming from when they come and apply for a job, or where they are when they're actually working for our companies. McKinsey published a report in July about the shrinking talent pool, and attributing it not just to one, but several factors. Their main point was that traditionalists, these are employees who value 9 to 5 hours full-time in office work, are a quickly shrinking demographic. They're being replaced by caregivers, for one. We knew before the pandemic that there was a care crisis taking shape, with projections that by 2021, half of US workers were going to have a caregiving need. So even before the pandemic, childcare costs and elder care responsibilities were increasing, and that trend has clearly continued. The pandemic caused some cultural shifts related to redefining priorities, specifically the meaning of work, as well as accelerated retirements. While there are some indications that inflation and some hiring slowdowns are having an impact, employees are still seeking more balance, flexibility, and mobility in their roles. And while some retirees have returned to the workforce, many have a newfound freedom of choice and are being selective about the type of work that they do. The Great Reorganization, or attrition, or reshuffling, as we've heard it called, shows that people are not only changing jobs, but changing industries in a big way. That same McKinsey report showed data that out of the people who quit their jobs between April 2020 and April 2022, 48% got a new job in a different industry. And leading the pack with even higher numbers were retail, finance, nonprofit, and insurance. So the value proposition of work and location has shifted, definitely catalyzed by advances in technology throughout the pandemic and before. With the right tools and work mix, employees are evaluating what exactly they need to be on site to do. So what is flexibility? It's obviously a priority both for employees and organizations. And in thinking about operationalizing and specific tactics to move forward, the starting point really should be based on what the needs are of your own organization and your teams. It may not look the same across the organization, and that's okay. Not all people will want the same thing to be remote or hybrid or on-site, and not all aspects of jobs lend themselves to remote and hybrid locations. So first, defining the types of flexibility that are right for your organization can be really helpful. Looking at work location, hybrid and remote, those are all pretty standard. But what are some other ways that you might be able to support both the needs of your business and the needs of the employees through flexibility? For example, can work be asynchronous? Some companies have defined core work hours or work days for collaborative needs, while other hours can be defined individually. Another question is, do all roles need to be full-time? What work might be better suited to being project-based or part-time, no matter the experience level? One of the things that we see happen repeatedly in our work is the value of a seasoned strategic hire in a part-time position. Companies not only get the execution that they're looking for, but they also get a strategic perspective and an experienced employee who hopefully can scale as that role grows over time. So flexibility really should be focused on your end goal of what makes your organization and your team successful. And that involves knowing what drives your culture and your innovation. Specifically in that, who are the people who make you successful? And what behaviors do they exhibit? And related to innovation or work product, what requires collaboration and what would be better suited to concentrated work time? Almost all roles have a mix of these. So the bottom line is, how do you enable people and teams to do their best work? The companies who get this equation right, as it's related to that culture and innovation, will have employees who thrive. They're going to be engaged. They're going to have lower levels of burnout, higher levels of well-being, and they're going to stay in their roles for a longer period of time. So we're going to look at flexibility as a recruiting tool. So once you have an idea of the culture and innovation that are key to your organization and a few models of the types of flexibility that you might be offering, this can become a recruiting tool. So we're going to pivot over to using it as a 2-year advantage for new positions. This is especially important if you're competing with organizations who might be offering higher pay. And as you implement and have success with specific types of flexibility, these success stories are going to help you define your recruiting goals and target talent. They're going to help you get buy-in from your hiring teams, allow you to incorporate flexibility models into your job descriptions and your screening process, and then continue that forward as you onboard, train, and retain your employees. So let's dive into each of these 3 areas. Looking first at your recruiting goals centered around flexibility. Flexibility can help you access across those non-traditional talent pools that I mentioned. Many of the 7+ million caregivers and people who accelerated their retirements have not returned to work, and given an on-ramp and flexibility, are motivated to engage. With fully remote or minimum travel, you may also be able to access employees in geographically dispersed areas with lower costs of living or 0 to no commuting costs, attracting more affordable talent. Chances are that some of your future hires are going to come from referrals and networking, possibly agencies working on your behalf. And as flexible models have proved successful, you want to be sure that you're using these in your recruiting story, specifically your job descriptions, your career page, all of your screening interviews, and the messaging that your hiring teams are sending out about your company and the roles, and through other marketing, social media, etc. Next, we're going to take a look at how you can use flexibility to target talent. So these are just a few examples and some of the characteristics that are typical, not absolute, but typical for each demographic. Starting with young professionals, especially in the first years of working, these are people who benefit from being in a mentoring situation with a little bit more supervision than someone who's more senior. They rely on their work for their social connections, their network connections, and that mentoring. And so data shows that people in this demographic are typically looking for 1 to 2 remote days per week. Caregivers, or people who typically range from late career millennials through baby boomers, they're more established in their careers. They may be caring for kids, they may be caring for elders, they may be caring for both or themselves, and they may have a side business that they're also focusing on. People in this demographic require less supervision. You can give them a little bit more direction. They're demonstrating more independence. And data shows us that people in this demographic are typically looking for 3 to 4 remote days per week. So you can see how, depending on who you're targeting and who you're interviewing for a specific role, you might be targeting different types of flexibility for different people. This next slide is a little bit of an eye chart, but I want to look at the infrastructure of the screening process and where flexibility really comes into play. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road as far as candidates are concerned. And it really starts with a job description that reflects the flexibility of the role and the team. Savvy job seekers know when a role has been, quote unquote, flex washed, when the flexibility label has been applied but not really incorporated into the job. So looking at that infrastructure before you even put pen to paper, it helps to look at the 3 areas, to look at these 3 areas: company or department structures, the nature of the job, and successful candidate factors. You want to get clear on how flexibility will be supported or impacted by things like technology and culture, or within the role. What are the needs for collaboration and how will success be measured? And then finally, how will you interact in areas like training and mentoring? This infrastructure then translates into specific areas of the job description, obviously like hours, location, and tools, but other critical areas related to what work and how it will get done within the structure of the team. And don't forget in your job description to include some compelling information or the why people want to work here kind of language. Finally, flexibility extends to onboarding. You want your new hire to stay engaged while they give notice to their old company, if they're leaving a role, and as they transition to your team, and also remain in place once they arrive. Some ways you can do this are through communication during the notice period and first days on the job, creating that big welcome. You might do this through a formal announcement, including your new hire on some important information pre-start to help them plan their calendar and engage with your brand. Speaking of branding, branded items or a remote work success package could be another way to engage during this interim period. Other important steps in successful onboarding are creating a productive environment and a solid training plan. Everyone is busy, and if we're not staffed at full capacity, it's likely that our current employees are doing more than one job, or at least job function. We can almost guarantee in our work that if a new hire walks into a chaotic environment where work just gets dropped on their desk without a clear plan or priorities on what gets done and how things are learned, that it's going to be a limited start. So the more specific you can get with the onboarding timeline, including who will fulfill each step, the better. Though not part of your recruiting plan, flexibility also plays a role in retention. In the next session, Stephanie Hyder will talk more about engagement and collaboration in a hybrid environment, especially important as when you have mixed locations. Other long-term strategies include reviewing goals and outcomes to ensure that everyone knows what success looks like within a team or group, how it will be measured based on metrics and deliverables, and openly iterating as needs change, as they surely will. Also, stay interviews, which provide valuable intel on retention before an exit interview is necessary, can be golden opportunities to grab information on why people would like to stay within the organization. And with that, I am going to open it up to questions and answers.
Leanne, thank you very much. I think the word flexible has taken on a new meaning inside of the last 3 years, or at least it's taking on a new intention or attention of folks. So we really appreciate your subject matter expertise. I had 3 questions come in. I'm just being mindful of time. It looks like we have plenty of time to take care of these relative to some of the information you shared. And bear with me, I'm reading these from the chat box and a little bit small, but so here's question number 1 for you, Leanne. Some of my teams have indicated a need to work in person, whether it be art and design or a typical function. How do we implement flexibility differently across the organization?
It's a good question, and one that a lot of companies struggle with because, we're always having an eye toward equity, right? I think the first thing that you need to do is have real clarity around what the roles are and what that collaborative and independent work mix is for your department or teams. And then beyond really understanding what that mix is, talking about the value of that work, the value of collaboration and the value of independent work. The independent work piece is usually where some tension arises. People have, greater desire to be working remotely or at least hybrid and remote for part of the time. So talking about the value of that independent work can go a long way. And then taking into account what each person's ideal is to the extent that's possible, possibly allowing for special circumstances, but fairly.
Oh, that's very helpful, Leanne. And I would certainly agree, just kind of thinking about some of the work and some of the teams that I work with. Geez, isn't it amazing the acumen or the preference relative to, whether it be in person or whether it be virtual or whether it be a mixture of both. It seems to be pretty crazy just how different everyone is in every aspect. Question number 2 here, Leanne, that came in from one of the attendees is, since going remote, our turnover has increased by 10 to 15%. I worry that when people don't work side by side, that they don't fully connect with each other at the company. Other than requiring office presence, how do we reduce turnover?
Another really great question. It probably has about 6 parts, but what I would do is start looking at that turnover to see what's driving it. Is it engagement? Are people not engaging? And was that lack of engagement there prior to being in a remote environment or not? If it's not engagement, it could be other opportunities or growth. So understanding what really is driving that increased turnover is important. I think also understanding that turnover is happening. And so 10 to 15% might actually be a good number in your industry. Not that we don't want to strive for 0, but, understanding why it's happening can be helpful. And then I'm not going to steal any thunder from Stephanie's talk in the next session, but hybrid and remote environments require intentionality. And there are lots of ways to go about that, but it's different from working 100% in person when some of the glue and the stickiness happens without actually having to plan it. So I'm going to leave that to Stephanie to talk about next session.
Excellent. All right, looking forward to Stephanie's chat as well. And then the last question I have here in the chat in the Q&A box, Leanne, for you is, I know we would attract more of the parents who left during the pandemic back to work if we could offer part-time hours, but our hiring teams are reluctant to give up headcount. How do I convince them otherwise?
I think some of that might be in the semantics, right? I know not all companies can, offer a broad definition, but I think it does start with how you define headcount. Is it your number of people or is it your number of full-time equivalents? Because then you can start playing with some fractional roles. And I can almost guarantee you, if you have let's say you have a job share situation where it's just 50-50 down the middle, that if you compare that to productivity and output compared to one full-time person, you are going to get more output from two half-time people than you probably will from one full-time person. It definitely takes clarity around the role and communication. And it might not be appropriate for every role, but the advantages from, the productivity for sure, and also in redundancy of people who know how to do a specific job, those advantages can be huge.
Great. Well, Leanne, this has been super impactful, not only for myself, but I know for our attendees. We're happy to share more information in a recap email to our broader audience further into the discussion, and they'll be able to reach out to you if they have any more specific questions. But thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here.
All right, and now we'll continue the conversation. Excited to now introduce Beata Dragovic. Beata is the founder and CEO at Freedom Trail Financial, and Beata is going to lean in to the discussion around her expertise, which is compensation. Beata.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us. As Sean mentioned, my name is Beata Dragovic, and I'm a founder of Freedom Trail Financial. And I would like to specify at the very beginning that we are a wealth management firm and we work extensively with folks in biotech and the tech areas. And I am not a compensation expert per se. We strongly help clients negotiate new offers and equities. Therefore, we are very much looking at compensation trends, and we are basically using a lot of research, let that be Aon, WTW, Deloitte, NASPP. So we use research ourselves to educate ourselves on compensation trends, especially in these last few years. We majorly help negotiate equity. So what we are going to be talking about is about compensation trends in general, and I will specifically talk about equity compensation trends. We see that as being one of the biggest part of the draw to attract and retain talent. And I will be talking about benefits. Benefit enrollment season is coming up, and the importance of that and how that's changing. And we'll touch base on negotiations as well at the very end. So compensation trends have been changing in the last few years significantly. It has been shaped by the pandemic. We have a continuous wage growth. We have wage growth that is at a 20-year high. It eased a little bit in the last few months, but we still have approximately just under 2 million more jobs that people are willing to take. There's a continuous demand for talent and shortage of workers. So we can say that after many, many years, as I've been an advisor, the last 20 plus years, it is an employee-driven market for sure, not just in industries that anyway are in continuous demand for talent, but overall. So companies really started to think about compensation differently, and they have to do that to stay competitive. And they are offering comprehensive compensation packages. it's pretty much becoming more and more apparent that firms will not be able to tackle attraction and retention with merit alone. Salaries, sign-on bonuses, as it is, are at an all-time high, but companies do have to look at the total employee value proposition, and that will include career advancement, accelerated promotions. We see based on research and based on experience that those two are extremely important across all generations, not just millennials. And organizational approaches to total rewards really need to highlight the increased focus on employee-centered strategies and well-being, which Maury Ryan will be talking about next week. So with that said, let's switch to and talk about equity a little bit. I will be talking about this a bit more extensively as I find it to be so important. Equity is probably is one of the most important attraction and retention tool, and it's not necessarily just in public companies, but we see it in private companies as well. And again, this is very interesting. Year to date, IPOs are down 91%. That doesn't mean that private companies are not offering equity. So what we've seen is, as it comes to equity, first of all, the increased use of equity as it has been a trend all along, just to retain even key employees. We see RSUs, which is full value shares, restricted stock units, introduced at a much earlier stage, again, to attract talent as well as retain employees. At the same time, we are seeing faster vesting of various equity grants, and we see equity choice, meaning you are offering stock options or RSUs to your employees. This used to be one of the number one questions many years ago from clients. Now, after 10, 15 years, I see it coming back again, and when folks going for a new role. Here, I want to mention that Bruce Bloomberg, who is actually the founder it's a quick shout out to him, to mystockoptions.com, that has tremendous information on equity grants. He wrote an excellent article about this. It's the large tech companies that started this trend in the last few years: Amazon, Apple, and Alphabet, Google itself. Amazon introduced monthly vesting. Apple introduced out-of-cycle RSUs during the year just for key employees, C-level folks, and Google started to use front-load vesting, meaning that vesting of RSU grants used to be pretty much on an equal basis every year. Google started the faster vesting of introducing after first year, 35% of the grant is vesting, and all these we see as a very important retention tool or to attract new talent. So with that said, let's switch to a little bit talking about the most common grants that we see out there. And these are stock options, restricted stock, RSUs, and performance shares. And I'm going to talk about just briefly about all of them, what they are. So a stock option is basically a right to buy a company stock at a grant price. Once as an option vests, it can be exercised. Obviously, this only makes sense for your employee if the market price of the stock is higher than the grant price. There are two different type of stock options: non-qualified and incentive stock options. They differ based on taxes. It's really not for this webinar to talk about that, but it's important to mention. Then we have restricted stock, RSUs. They are both transfer of company stock from employer to employee. There are slight differences. They both taxed as ordinary income at vesting. At the same time, restricted stock RSUs is more of a bookkeeping entry, while restricted stock, the company will transfer the share to the employee, but they keep the shares in an escrow as long as till vesting. And then we noticed performance shares over the last decade. They become much more popular, especially for C-level employees. They are usually not granted upfront, but rather as part of a long-term incentive plan. They are typically tied to a future goal, such as a profit target for the company. It's very popular. Each unit usually gets a value and is paid out in stock or cash or a combination of two. And they pretty much behave like RSUs. So they are, again, a company stock just tied to the performance. And it can be actually very beneficial because it can be higher than 100% target pay if the company exceeds its performance target. So those are the three most common grants we see. I actually decided to take a look, and I looked at NASPP, the National Association of Stock Plan Professionals. They do a survey based on every 3 years about the equity compensation and the trends around that. And the 2021 survey shows that 94% of the responding companies award actually restricted stock, RSUs. This has a lot of reasons why this happened, but because of this next slide of the recent popularity of RSUs, I wanted to look at that. We see that performance-based awards around 87% of companies who offer that. And as it comes to stock options, it decreased to just under 50%, which is again very interesting because if we are looking at the same survey 10 years ago, options were the number one grants. So corporate compensation really, when what kind of grants companies are offering, it can actually depend on various different factors, such as accounting rules, economic conditions, even competition. So the change of attitude towards RSUs is really gained popularity in the recent years. First of all, RSUs always have a tangible worth for employees. So this is a company stock that your employees will receive at vesting. And because there's always a tangible worth, it's popular. It's actually also very popular with institutional shareholders. They are much more favorable than stock options. Stock options used to have basically a backdating feature that made them less popular. Also, what helped around RSUs is that the accounting for RSUs became less complex. Accounting rules favored stock options for many, many years, and that changed in the last few years as well. Also, we've been talking about performance shares. That's equity grants that are tied to basically to a performance, to a target, company target. It is much easier to take care of that with RSUs than with options. And for privately held companies, restricted stock can avoid valuation issues. Again, offering discounted stock options have some kind of tax penalties that used to cause problems. So overall, these are the major reasons that RSUs are so popular. I also want to mention that it also depends on the stage of the company. So we see early stage companies pretty much only offer stock options, no matter what the survey says. And then as soon as the company starts going towards an IPO or prepare for an IPO, that's when they start introducing RSUs, restricted stock units. I would, all right, so let's go to the next slide. And that's about options, because options are also still fairly popular. And they have an upside potential that RSUs don't have. So this long-term potential of the upside that will always make options, I believe, very popular. A lot of my clients prefer, if they have the choice, to also have options, because with RSUs, you will never have the upside potential, because pretty much your compensation or your grant is tied to the market price. The nature of stock options are also can be really motivational for employees, especially for C-level employees. Employees can start focusing on the long-term corporate success of the company. Again, why? Because options value will significantly increase if the company's stock will increase. So it can really improve, it can be a motivator to improve long-term financial performance of the company. And most importantly, and at the end of the RSU slide, I was going to talk about this, probably it's the best place to talk about it here when you would offer RSUs or options, is your company stock price decreased recently. It is a really good time to offer stock options because of the low grant price, right? So, and that's pretty much the same reason as well why RSUs are becoming more popular. It started actually in 2008, 2009. So in a volatile market, employees are still getting paid if you are offering them RSUs. The stock options can be out of the money in many times, especially in a bear market, what we are experiencing right now. So the RSUs are a popular grant also when we have a bear market. So with that said, let's shift gears and talk about benefits. And this is something I know a lot of this, what I'm talking about here, will be discussed very thoroughly next week. I really want to just give the highlights and really talking about more so what are part of compensation and benefits we are looking at. So when a new client comes to us, we really like to talk about and we really like to examine their benefits package, because you offering benefits to your clients, they are basically wealth building tools. So times significantly changed around employer sponsored benefits. You have to have a clear strategy to help your employees select the best benefits for themselves and their families. First of all, I would want to start by benefits enrollment season is coming up. Let your benefits show up. I see it with clients coming to me, new clients, that it really amazes me. C-level, upper management folks really don't understanding the basis of their benefits. It's not communicated to them clearly. They don't understand the value that you are providing for them. So you want to communicate it. Use the benefit enrollment season to boast about the protection they provide, to remind your employees of their value. It's actually very important. Benefits are one of the top 3 reasons people join a company and stay at the job. So don't miss the opportunity to talk about what you offer to them during the annual enrollment. I also see, and WTW did research on this, that just providing choice and opportunities for employees to choose between various and select what's best for them, that already improves appreciations towards the company. It is very important. Benefits enrollment season is also an opportunity to create awareness about well-being, mental health, time off programs. And one of the top reasons where your employees are not productive during the workplace, at the workplace, is financial problems or mental health. A lot of research shows that as well. And I know next session we will be talking about this much more. The other part is how people want to receive information about benefits changes as well. Digital engagement tools that mimic the digital experience that we use, they are essential. It's about meeting people in all ways, wherever they may be. It's a hybrid environment out there. Not everyone is back in the office. So technology is, again, crucial. And I see out there companies doing this exponentially well, certain companies, and certain companies not so much. And that's when clients and your employees are confused. And first, I probably should have started with this, but you need to listen and understand your employer's needs, consider affordability, and understand what are the diverse needs of your employees. And creating and deploying basically a listening strategy will help you make concrete and data-driven decisions. So with that said, I want to just pretty much summarize what we are talking about here. So it's not just about compensation anymore, right? So the total rewards approach that employees are taking, it's about the total employee experience. So you need to reset philosophy around total rewards. It is as much as about pay, benefits, careers, as much as about well-being. You need to emphasize flexibility, choice, and value. Again, a lot of other folks will be talking about it. Stephanie and Marie will be talking about it next time. Promoting well-being and build resilience is very important, and align rewards with new ways of working. A lot of people right now don't need car allowance, but they potentially will need tuition reimbursement, reskilling, upskilling. So adopt and create a full-on employee experience. And the very last slide and very last topic I would like to talk about, which we do extensively, is negotiations. First of all, I like to call this now an employee-run marketplace. The biotech sector and tech sector I work with a lot is there's the demand for talent. They could negotiate 5 years ago as well. But what I see right now that this is expanding. Most importantly, everyone is getting much more sophisticated. I personally myself been on a few webinars this past summer that specifically targets your employees and help them negotiate. Everyone is much more comfortable around equity. You need to be ready to answer questions around that. Folks are knowledgeable and they understand their own value. With that said, I also want to make you understand is that everyone knows it, that the initial offer is the most flexible, and employees know that. I find different ways how companies help with negotiations. I find it very clear when you tell employees what is that's negotiable right up front. That helps them also make decisions. And with that said, if there are any questions, Sean, thank you so much for your patience. And if there are any questions for me.
Yeah, thank you very much for leading the discussion around compensation. I know a lot of folks relative to this new talent economy typically think of compensation as base salary and cash comp, but geez, it's so much more than that. And really neat to hear some of the strategies that some people should be thinking about as we look to make our places thrive. There were two questions that came into the Q&A box for you, Beata, and the first one is, you pointed out the difference between RSUs and restricted stock. How do companies decide whether to grant restricted stock or RSUs? And the attendee then added, what are the characteristics that matter to them?
Very good question. So I probably should have said that when I was talking about the survey that NASPP did, that 91% of companies actually offer RSUs. Only 18% of these companies offer restricted stock. So restricted stock is definitely not as popular. And whenever I see it, it's only really pretty much always for C-level employees. There are major differences. First of all, what probably I didn't mention is that with restricted stock, your employee, this is probably one of the most important features that it has, is that your employee are able to choose an 83B election. So basically can decide to pay taxes on the grant versus paying taxes at vesting. And that does not apply for RSUs. This also does not allow your RSUs also, because of the same exact reason, RSUs will offer a much more probably higher tax deductions for the company. So that's also the possible reason. Very much so we are focusing on RSUs and we are talking about that. Restricted stock is much more complex. So the administration is complex as the shares are in an escrow versus RSU is just a bookkeeping entry for a company till it vests. So that's definitely one of the reasons that I see. Positives towards unrestricted stock, again, they offer dividends, a right to vote versus RSUs will not. But I also see performance-based grants are very popular. So RSUs are much more easier to offer with vesting and with performance-based grants. So those are probably some of the most important ways how I see employers look at it. And I would say here one last thing, that definitely communicate to your employees if you offer restricted stock. Even C-level employees, I need to look through their grant list. Nobody ever knows if this is a restricted stock, and there can be a really good tax benefit if they choose the 83B election.
Sure. Thanks, Beata. So there's extreme differences and certainly a lot for folks to consider in each one of those avenues, for sure.
Yes.
And then the second question that came in through from the audience, Beata, is from your perspective as an advisor, what do employees prefer as it comes to equity grants if they have a choice, options or RSUs?
This is a very good question again, and that's very important that you are actually asking that question, because it should be about employees' preferences as much as what's good for the company. What I noticed, to answer that more briefly, I would say that the majority likes a balance. Stock options have wealth building capacity that RSUs will never have. At the same time, your employees will always have short-term intermediate goals as well. So it is much easier as RSUs vest. They are able to sell the stock and fund short-term goals, let that be second home, let that be education goal. I see more of a balance. As your employees starting to get closer to retirement, I see RSUs are much more popular because, again, employees will know what is it that they will receive in the next XYZ years, versus if the company doesn't do too well in the next few years, their stock options could be out of the money and have no value in it.
Excellent. Thank you, Beata. Well, Beata, thank you very much for the conversation today. Much like Leanne, we will be sending out a follow-up note to our broader audience that has contact information and the available to get in touch with you to continue the conversation. I want to say a very big thank you to our audience with great participation today through the great questions, and to our experts, Leanne Rod and Beata Dragovic. Really well thought out, well done presentations covering two of the pillars that we chatted about. Folks, tune in to the next part of our series, where we are joined by another pair of world-class experts. Maury Ryan is the founder and CEO of Advancing Wellness, and Stephanie Heider is the founder and CEO of Bridging Distance. And we will continue the conversation with these two pillars around optimizing hybrid workplaces and the importance and business case of well-being. We'll see you then. Thank you.